Okay, folks, it's 9 o'clock. I can see the numbers of participants going up now, so I'll try and make the preamble last a tiny bit longer than normal. So welcome to the second day of the CICS working group. Normal rules apply. We've got James here as our presenter, again for his second security presentation. Everyone's on mute. If you're new, there's a chat. If you've got any questions, myself or Jenny, one of my colleagues, will endeavour to ask James your question on your behalf. There will be 10-15 minutes at the end to ask questions, maybe in the chat. I'll maybe experiment and try and unmute one or two people so they can maybe ask the questions in person if we've got time. If I can ask you all to leave feedback again, I'll post a link in the chat towards the end of the session. Feedback's much appreciated. And without further ado, please carry on.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first CICS session of the second day. And we're really jumping straight into the deep end with CICS security and looking at the application side of security today. If you're in my session yesterday morning, we were talking around compliance, and this time we're really focusing on application and diagnosis as well. Okay, so for those of you who weren't in my session yesterday, I'm Lewis. I'm a developer on the CICS TS trust and compliance team, which is the security team, and I've worked on various amounts of these features in the last couple of years, so I should be in good stead to answer any questions that you have. So as Rob said, please feel free to post in chat. So let's jump straight into it. So let's look at the overview of 6.1 again. So the theme of this release that we've just GA'd actually back in June is simplification, and this is heavily based on talking to customers like yourselves potentially, and looking at feedback from customers and working with our design partnership and business partners to really understand the pain points in the organizations of our customers, because that's really what we want to be addressing. So from them conversations, we've really found 3 interrelated problems, which we have tried to address under that umbrella of simplification, and that is compliance, configuration, and diagnosis. As we go through, you'll find most of the features that I'm talking about hopefully tied back to simplification, and you can see potentially how they fit in with them problems, okay? So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about in CICS 6.1 for security is the Cat 1 definition removal. And I know Rob likes this one. He's a big fan of this enhancement within CICS. And what is it? So Cat 1 transactions currently require security definitions, and that is required for all region users, everyone using CICS. All of these users have to have access to all of the Cat 1 transactions, even though only the region user ID is allowed to run them. That means we've got to go through and make all them RACF definitions, and then CICS will call out to the ESM to understand the level of access that the user has. So what we've come up with in 6.1 is, why are we asking the ESM, like RACF, who the region, if they have access, when we actually know who the region user ID is internally within CICS? So in CICS 6.1, we no longer call the ESM, and it's one of them ironic things really, that actually calling the ESM is less secure than not calling it in this particular instance. So we now do an internal security check within CICS to verify that the person running the transaction is in fact the region user. And if that check fails, we will append. And that is that really. So just doing an internal check, and that really makes things more secure. And it's more simple. So going back to one of them pillars of 6.1, and that addresses the simplification side of it. So with this, we've removed the C list, which had all of the sample definitions, which we used to try to help our customers create the definitions they needed for the Cat 1 transactions, and all of the documentation has been enhanced to address this change so that our auditors are aware of why we suddenly why we've suddenly changed the access on these transactions. So let's have a look at what we've done in 6.1 for additional security diagnostics, okay? So again, this is really addressing the simplification side of things, trying to make things easier. There's a really difficult problem within CICS, whereas that some security issues can be really difficult to diagnose. And you'll see as we go through this presentation, I'm going to keep going back to that, and you'll see how we've really tried to nail that down in this release. So some of the kind of obvious security messages you might see should something go wrong is a DFH XS 1111 message, or a ICH 408I message, which is a quite helpful one from RACF, which tells us where the failure occurred, who the failure occurred with, and sometimes why. So what access was needed and what access was actually there. But that doesn't always give the full story on a security issue. Let's have a look at a configuration like this, which is fairly usual and isn't that complex, but let's have a look how it can really change the diagnosis process that we've just spoke about. So in the case that I link over to a program with a user ID, what happens if we've got a functional user ID on that link, on the configuration of that CICS region and the session? So in the occasion where we're using an attached sec local on a connection and we've got a functional user ID set on the session, things can actually change a bit, because even though we've started that work with a certain user ID, now unknown to us, that user ID is now changed. So when we're looking for things like ICH 408I messages, we're actually getting a functional user ID as opposed to the original user ID. And to somebody trying to diagnose an issue where there's hundreds of links, it's quite difficult to know that that message relates to our security problem that we've observed on a busy system. So in this case, we've got a lot of work to do to try to figure out who it is. So we've understood that, and this is, again, directly from customer feedback and research, that this is a big issue. So what have we done to address that? So we understand we've got origin data within CICS. Every work that starts within CICS, every hop that goes across, we create association origin data. And that basically says, where did this task start? And it holds that information as we go across systems and as we do more work in the system. So we've already got this, and we've had this for many releases. So why are we not using it in our diagnosis messages? So that's exactly what we did. So in this case, we've got our, if we look at the 3270 request at the bottom of the screen, we've got our usual 1111 message. And you can see that the user security violation there is for user Lou. And now we've got this new 1117 message below it, which links back to the origin user ID. And it directly tells us that a security violation originated from an Apple ID, an IP address, and then most importantly, a user ID. But it keeps the user ID and the link user together, so the person diagnosing this issue knows that this is directly involved. And again, as usual, we have documented this message, and this is really clear now for us to go on the IBM docs, look at what that message has come out as, and it will tell us all the elements within that message to try to make us understand what to do next. So, instruction, execution, protection, IEP. So, IEP in 6.1 is the function which allows us to protect the existing CICS DSAs from instruction execution. And this is very much designed around preventing buffer overflow exploits and keeping storage clean as well. So what we've done is we've got 4 new unprotected DSAs, which are on screen there. And that separates the data storage from the program storage. And with this feature turned on, and I'll go into that in a moment, it allows us to prevent code being executed in data storage, whether that's done on purpose or inadvertently. So as you can see at the very top right of the screen, we've got what the DSAs look like in CICS 5.6. And then at the bottom, we've got what the DSAs now look like in 6.1. And that's very clearly separated into executable and data storage. So should the user try to execute code in EU DSA, which we can see in 6.1 is data storage, a protection exception will occur as an OC4. And our kernel will identify the OC4 as an IEP program check, and we will output a relevant message in the log, but we'll also trace as well. So we understand exactly what's happened that we've tried to execute in data storage. Now, we often know that there is potentially a genuine requirement to make data areas executable. So we do have options here which allow us to override that function. There's an API option, XPI. You've got the user exits and also in native assembler as well. Now there is some function that we have to do to put IEP on. It's not currently set to true by default. So this is something that has to be opted into. And that is currently controlled by a feature toggle. But the feature toggle will only protect or only control the protection of the original DSAs. So if we don't specify IEP on, what will happen is, should we request some storage and it's unprotected, we will still allocate it from the new DSAs. However, if the feature toggle is on, that behavior still remains. However, we protect the original ones as well. So TLS 1.3 support. This is a really, really big area of CICS 6.1, which was allowing the support for TLS 1.3. We had to make numerous changes in multiple areas of CICS to be able to support TLS 1.3. And a lot of that has given us opportunity for that simplification and to enhance the diagnosis within CICS. And hopefully you'll see that as I go through now. So there is significant changes to TLS protocol in 1.3. We've got 3 main ciphers, which are on the screen there. Now, them ciphers have got, with TLS 1.3, we've got huge performance changes in the form of a single handshake. We've got more secure algorithms, and there is significant change into caching as well. Now, the support for CICS for TLS 1.3 comes from ZOS 2.4, so that is a requirement. And as it stands, and I think this is still up to date, System SSL does not support sysplex caching for TLS 1.3. So should that be something that is used, TLS 1.3 cannot be migrated to. So we've had, as I said, we've had to make lots of external changes within CICS to support TLS 1.3. So in terms of the SIP parameters, we've actually removed encryption, which was a SIP parameter in 5.6, and we've changed how min TLS level works as well. So the only 2 SIP parameters which really need to be looked at for TLS configuration is the minimum and maximum. Our minimum, as is in the word, it specifies the minimum TLS level that we support in that CICS system. And the maximum is, again, the maximum. Interestingly enough, it's good to note that TLS 1.3 is not default in CICS 6.1. It's TLS 1.2. And that is simply because there are configuration efforts and migration efforts to take into account when we're migrating to TLS 1.3. And we've now deprecated TLS 1.1 as well. So it's still an option, but it's going away essentially. So what's changed in terms of the resources? Because I said there was these configuration efforts, migration efforts, and this really surrounds what we're talking about now. And we've had to make changes to 3 main resources as IPCon, the EuroIMAP, and TCP/IP service. So the ciphers attribute has changed. So previously, we've been able to specify a range of 2-digit cipher codes on the cipher attribute for them resources. However, now we're actually enforcing the use of XML files. So we have previously been able to use the XML files to specify the ciphers we want to use, but now the amount of digits in the ciphers changed. We are now making it mandatory to use XML files to specify them ciphers. What this also means is that we've changed the default ciphers from the very bottom of the screen there, that long string, to an actual XML file which sits within the USS config. When I spoke about the migration efforts, we got timer on the slides. When I spoke about the migration efforts and configuration efforts that we needed to do to get to TLS 1.3, what I meant was when we install CICS from fresh, the default ciphers XML sits within the USS home samples. And the reason that is because we want the customer, we want the security admin to be copying over that default ciphers file and then configuring it for the needs and security regulations of your organizations. So that has to be changed, customized and added to, and then put into USS config. Without that, things do not work. So running TLS 1.2. So how does this work when we can support 1.2 and 1.3 in a system all at once? Well, should we be running TLS 1.2 in the system by way of having the min TLS levelers 1.2 and the max as 1.3, our numeric ciphers are deprecated. So we can still use them and we get a warning message on the terminal screen should we use them. However, should we be running 1.3 exclusively, so by way of min and max set to TLS 1.3, our numeric ciphers are not supported at all. And again, as I said before, all our definitions must use cipher files. If we try to install with any numeric ciphers at all, we get the following warning messages on screen or error messages, and the install will fail. And then what happens in an application program when we're using the API commands? Well, if we're running TLS 1.2 and earlier again, we get a warning message which is issued once per program. And that is when we're using the ciphers attribute at all. If we have a program which has been translated at 5.6 or prior to that, we still honor using ciphers. However, again, this warning message will show up. So what do we do now that we can't use ciphers on these API commands? Well, we ignore the ciphers option completely if it's there, if it's present, and we must now put the ciphers on a URI map, which is then specified on something like a web open. Now, if that URI map is not specified, business as usual, we will use default ciphers. And again, the way that's now being done is through an XML file. And that is part of the migration efforts to 1.3. And we've got a really detailed set of documentation on the IBM docs, which specifies how to go about migrating and the considerations that have to be taken before we can perform that migration. And that includes the default ciphers and making sure the ciphers that we're using meet the regulations and compliance of our organization. So what happens if we try to translate the ciphers attribute in a CICS 6.1 system running TLS 1.3? That no longer works. We can't do that. It will fail. Excuse me. So improved diagnostics for TLS. So with the TLS 1.3 changes, as I said previously, it's allowed us to have an opportunity to make diagnostics clearer and better for TLS, again, coming under simplification. So when we have a TLS error, usually we get this DFH SO0123 message. That's all well and good. It gives us information. However, there are some issues with that message. Now, if you've got a seasoned pro who looks at that message day in, day out, they might have a better time of diagnosing it than others. However, a lot of the time that isn't true, and it can cause issues depending on what that issue is. So the problem is that that single message is being used for every connection error within CICS. It's really difficult, again, for us to identify the end user that has caused the problem. So similar to going back to our XS1117 message that we've now got. And there's also no indication as to whether, for example, in that particular example, there's no way to tell whether that certificate validation is failed on the client side or the server side. This, for us as IBM, frequently leads customers to getting down these rabbit holes of trying to diagnose it, finding there's issues, and having to raise a case with IBM support, who are then looking at dumps and traces to try to support our customers. So we wanted to really get to the root cause of the problem and put a solution in. So what have we done with this? So we've actually separated out common and simple error messages. And it's important to note that we've still left SO0123 messages in for them experts who are happy with that message and can still diagnose issues from that message. We've also separated out the message is between client and server. So if you see a DFH SO03 message, you know that that message is for client errors. And should you see a DFH SO04 message, that shows it's for a server. And as we've done previously with the other diagnosis messages that we've gone through earlier today, we've included as much origin data and system SSL data as we possibly can. We've also enhanced our documentation. There's been a lot of work gone on within CICS 6.1 in enhancing the docs and making security documentation in particular more consumable and understandable for not only some of the seasoned hands within CICS, but also some of the new to CICS people like myself. And that includes a user action based task list on how we can go about step by step attempting to resolve an issue such as a certificate not being available or a certificate validation error. So in terms of monitoring statistics, this has been an area we've enhanced as well, because we've noticed that during the migration efforts, there is going to be a common problem of trying to upgrade a TLS level or removing a specific cipher. And that's because we don't always know which applications are currently using that level or cipher until we break them. So what we've done is we're going to capture statistics to understand how many times a protocol or a cipher individually is being used inbound and outbound. And we're also capturing monitoring records, which actually allows us to take the information from the statistics and hone in on the specific application or service which is using that level or cipher, so we can perform the migration efforts at that level before we break anything further down the line. So if we have a look at a DFH STUP output for the statistics in CICS 6.1, we can now see a fairly large section which shows us the TLS level and also interestingly the AT TLS levels inbound and outbound. We've also at the very bottom got the cipher statistics as well for inbound, outbound, TLS and AT TLS as well. So we can use this to understand in this case, well, I've got a TLS 1.1 inbound connection that's occurred over the times that I've captured these statistics. And I've also got an AT TLS 1.2 inbound connection. And I know that that TLS inbound has used cipher 0035 and the AT TLS inbound has used cipher 009D. And so I can now use that to take it over to the monitoring data. So in the monitoring data, which is shown in molds here, in the performance class for inbound connections, we display an SO TLS level, which shows us the level of TLS that's been used in that inbound connection. And we can also see the cipher as well. And from this, you can also see which TCP/IP service it came through, what program it kicked off, and all the other data relating to the specific service that used that cipher. We've also got an SO flag, which is a new flag to tell us whether or not that particular connection was TLS or AT-TLS. And the most interesting part about this is that we've not really done this before, by way of allowing us to have AT-TLS specific diagnosis within CICS itself. Usually you have to go out to COM server or SSL to understand whether we're talking about TLS or AT-TLS. And then if we look at the outbound connections for the resource class, we can see at URI map level, the TLS level, the cipher, and whether it's TLS or AT-TLS, again, by looking at that flag option. So we've also, with the AT-TLS support side of things, we've changed Inquire TCP/IP service. And that's ultimately because there is some occasions where we actually want to know if a connection or a TCP/IP service within its uptime or its lifetime, should we say, has been involved in an AT-TLS connection to understand the information around that TCP/IP service. So we've got this new option, AT-TLS, which has 4 CVDA values. And this is an Inquire. We cannot set this, it's read-only. And we can see that if AT-TLS is set to CVDA of used, that means that the TCP/IP service within the lifetime of it being online has received at some point AT-TLS secure connections. Should it be not used, then we haven't received any. Should it be mixed? Well, this is a stranger configuration, something that we won't necessarily see as much. And that indicates that we're probably using a non-recommended security configuration to allow multiple connections to come over that TCP/IP service with multiple configuration settings. We do have a question in chat, don't we, Rob? What will be the default cipher file if we switch off the feature toggle default cipher file, as the default ciphers are now mentioned via the default cipher file? Even in the case it will look for the, yes, so that feature, I believe that feature toggle doesn't apply to the default ciphers file for the way we've done it in 6.1. That is now a mandatory thing. There's no option on that. It's not whether we opt in or not. We have to have a default cipher XML file. And if we don't, things simply don't work. We can't use TLS, therefore we can't use security if we don't have that file in place. So there's loads of documentation in the 6.1 docs, Jiva, to explain why we need the cipher file, and also explain at what point we need it to, which should be at the point of migrating to 6.1. Does that answer your question? I will take, oh, perfect, thank you. Okay, so should we have a mixed, we're using a non-recommended security configuration potentially. And if we're undetermined, then that's the default. If it's not online, for example, and it's not possible because we haven't had any connections, for example. So on to one of my favorite topics of 6.1 personally, and that is security request recording. And really, this has been allowing us to give the customer the tools they need to do diagnosis work at a better level. So how do we come about with SRR, and what really is it? Well, firstly, the problem arose around the fact that lots of our customers have help desks or some form of user which acts as help desk. So in the case that a user reports a problem to such help desk or person, that person may struggle to find the usual relevant messages that we've seen today in more than one slide of the XS1111 or the ICH 408 iMessage. And should they actually find these messages, these messages might contain different users or unexpected users which don't relate to the security problem that occurred. And as somebody trying to diagnose this issue, trying to find the root cause, we can often struggle to find where that task actually began. Now, in a very strange situation where something works when it shouldn't, it's very difficult to diagnose that. Now, how are we supposed to, what we're supposed to be looking for? Oh, my slides are going mad. What we're supposed to be looking for in terms of diagnosis, because as far as CICS is concerned, nothing went wrong, something worked, and therefore we don't see any messages. Now, why do we see some of these more complex problems? Well, the task might feature, many, many links, and it also might mean that the links where we go off to these different CICS regions, they might have various security configurations which allow different user IDs to flow across, or use functional user IDs or linked user IDs. We've also got the case that certain configurations also might suppress messages, such as the ones we've spoke about. Now, these issues can take weeks to resolve and often, require us to step in as IBM to give some help if we can, and look at diagnosis, and it can get escalated far beyond than it actually really needs to. So in CICS 6.1, we have introduced security request recording. And what this is, it's a tooling which allows us to record authentication requests based on a criteria. So our help desk persona that we just spoke about in the previous slide will create a recording with the SPI that we provided based on a criteria which is consisted of task origin data. So the requests that match, so when a security request occurs, we then check to see if the origin data belonging to that matches the criteria in any of the recordings. And should it, we then take a recording of that security request, and it's logged against the recording that our help desk has set up. We can then run a sample batch job as well to process all the data within that log stream. And that then puts it into a really consumable CSV format, which allows somebody to go through and diagnose every security request which happened from start to end of a task. Now, some of the highlights of this feature is that it functions within a production environment simply because it isn't trace. We're doing it at such a minute and limited time level that we can use this within production. It's compatible within a sysplex. It works with all ESMs, not just RACF. And we secure the captured request securely in a log stream where only the intended security person can actually look at this. We also don't just include a static line of task. We also look at children started tasks as well. And we only have to set it on within one CICS region. So from doing research with our customers and going through design thinking sessions for the security request recording tool, we've come up with 3 personas that we think exist on average with this sort of scenario. So we've got our user. Sharon, that is a brilliant question. What is the overhead of running that impact to production environment? So we can't, I don't know if we've released the performance figures yet for CICS 6.1. There was test run within it. I have to refer you to that if it exists at the moment. I'm not sure we've released it. So I can't say today. All I can say, it's less than trace, and we believe it's a level which is acceptable in a production environment. It's obviously with trace, you're tracing a large amount of data. With this, you're literally tracing just a specific task or a specific user. So yeah, we're talking a really, really small amount, but the actual figures will be released in the performance report for CICS 6.1. Oh, sorry, again, my slides are going mad. I apologize, 1 second. Yeah, so we've got 3 personas within this task, within this tooling, which we believe exist. So we've got the user, who is our person in distress, who doesn't know what's going on. They've tried to do something and they've received a security error. We've got a help desk who they go to and they say, I've got an issue. And that help desk person can now create a recording from the SRR and hopefully capture that problem that's occurred. And then we've got our sysprog, who knows a little bit more than the help desk person potentially, or maybe they're the same person in some organizations. But they then process the capture request by running the job, and they can then perform the detailed analysis required to find the issue. Okay, I think we've got a duplicate. So what are we doing to allow this, to enable this? Well, we understand that the person who's setting the recording up needs a consumable way to do it, a user-friendly way to do it. So we've got a new SPI within CICS for set sec recording, as explained. I've got another question. Oh, yeah, thanks, Jenny. Yes, so we've got a new SPI within CICS to enable the SRR, which is the set secrec, which is on the original slide. But as we usually do with an SPI, and especially with something as required as this, we've implemented a new dialog into the CICS Explorer for 6.1, and that is a new action option on the region view to allow us to add a security request recording, which brings up the dialog on the right. And what we can do with this is the person who is using it can hopefully speak to the end user who has experienced the security issue and try to gauge what problem type that they might be having. So, for example, should the user have initiated a 3270 transaction, our person who is filling in the recording can enter into the 3270 tab, and it will hone down the amount of fields that they need to fill in, which is likely to capture that problem. So it's essentially a filtering system based on origin problem types, which may have caused the security issue. Thank you, Steve. Okay, so we've also got a security request recording view, and that is essentially our Inquire SecRec. So in this case, you can see I set up a recording called GSE, and you can see I'm capturing all the recording on my user ID and also against CMT. And I'm also, as soon as I hit a maximum of 5 on that, I will shut down the recording, and then we're ready for processing. And again, we can also remove recordings from this view too. So security request recording isn't just useful for them problems where we've got somebody who's experienced an issue, but what happens if we've got a long running task that we don't necessarily know the origin data for? Well, we've actually put SRR on the level, at a task level. So there's a new option on set task, which allows us to set SRR active for that task. And this is useful for our long running tasks where, again, we don't know the origin data or something has gone wrong along the way, and we need the data out of it. Now, obviously, setting this at a task level, we want to be able to understand how many tasks have currently got SRR active for. So we've put that on Inquire system as well. And this is all enabled within CMT, the WUI, and the Explorer as well. So if we have a look at how SRR works from an end-to-end point of view, at the top left, I've got a little diagram which hopefully symbolizes our complex CICS security setup. And what we do is we record our requests, which go down to a secure journal in the form of a log stream. We've then got a sample batch job SRRP, which is in CICS 6.1, which we can run to convert all that data within that log stream into a CSV file. And then what we can do is we can look at the summary report, which comes out the batch job, which gives us a bit of a picture of what our systems look like, which systems were touched within the task, and all the different configuration settings for that system. And we can also see our CSV file at the bottom there. So I will go into more detail on what that does look like. But essentially, we've got all the data in terms of each row is every security request that occurred, which we can see a access level for and a response as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just walk through a quick demo. So in this case, we're going to be doing it as a 3270. So I will run the demo here now, and I'll talk through it. So in this case, Darren, my assistant here, is running SRR 0, and at this point, they've got a security error. So this is our end user who needs some help from the help desk. So a help desk user can go over to the CICS Explorer, and they can do a right click on the region that it occurred in and add a security request recording. Now, at this point, we know it's a 3270 transaction, which has caused that. So we can fill in the details, in this case, share, and we can give it a maximum, and we can filter over to 3270, which allows us to put in the details which are likely needed to get all the information out from this. So we've now got a SRR, and we can check to see if it's in the SRR view, which we can see it active there. And the important bit to note there is that we can see at the very end, I know it's really small on your screens, I imagine, but we've got a maximum 5, which indicates we only want to pick up 5 requests from this recording until we deactivate the recording. And then we've got a current as well. And the current basically says how many have we currently got logged at that time of inquiring. So what we do then is the help desk user asks the end user, to recreate the issue. Now we've got a recording set. And so we've got a security error, right? And our help desk user can verify before we ask the sysprog to do process that our current is now 1. We've now logged 1 task against it. So we hopefully got some diagnosis information that we can now process from that. So we can go and we can now submit our SRRP job, which basically all we need to change within this is, if I pause it when we get down to the bottom, we've got, which I've just reset, haven't I? Sorry, 1 second. If I try to get back to where we were. Yep, so if we look here, we've got the CSV file, so where we want the CSV file to be processed, and that's in HFS. We've also got the log stream. Now, the log stream is the documentation page, which allows us to set that up to allow SRR to work, but it's essentially where our secure requests are stored. And then we've also got the HLQ of CICS. And then right at the bottom, we have the configuration options within CICS. In this case, we've just specified a match ID, which in this case, we're going to change to share because that's our recording name. And it's as simple as that. We do a save and a submit. And the job's now submit. So in the recording, we can go to SDSF and we can have a look at what we've processed to understand whether or not we've got the data out we require to diagnose the issue. So firstly, looking at the summary, we can see that useful page, which basically tells us what we've recorded in total. We've got we've got 1 failed security request down there. We've got 2 successful security requests, and we can see the origin transaction, and things look good. We've got timestamps. We've got information regarding the system, such as the ESM we're using, and all the different origin data as well. So this is really useful information just to allow us to verify that we've got the right data out. But that there doesn't allow us to diagnose the issue, really. We've just got a summary here. We need to go into the CSV file to really see what security requests we picked up and to try to decide where things have gone wrong. So that data sits within HFS in a CSV file, which our batch job has kindly produced for us. So we can see that's now been opened up. And if I pause, we can have a look at the data here. So what we've actually got is a list of all of the requests which have been captured against that recording. So what happened was that request got kicked off. It checked to see if the origin data of the task matched what we had in a recording. And in this case, it did. In these 31 cases, it did. And we can see some really useful information here. So we can see the profile that was involved in the security request, and we can see the class. We can see the access that it was required. And interestingly, that I want to draw your attention to is we've got a response and a reason. Now, our response is something usual we'd see, such as okay or exception. But we've also got a really interesting column, which is the reason. And now that tries to tell us why something might or might not have worked. So in the case of, if we look at line 30, again, I'm not sure how small this is on your screen. but we've got a security request to a surrogate profile by the looks of it, and the response is okay. So the security request was successful. But in this case, we can see in the reason, we've got X user set to no, which meant we didn't have user security on, really. So that might tell us that could have been the reason it was successful, when maybe we didn't think it should have been. We've also got column for failing user ID, and we've got information on the origin users there as well, okay? So hopefully from this, we can see how useful this can be, because we get a minute, granular view of every security request which occurred within a task. And should something go wrong, we've got the information there as well. It's important to note there's other use cases, which I imagine you can imagine yourselves, where this doesn't just have to be for failing tasks. This could also be to get a clear view of what the task is doing from a security point of view, or a sysprog point of view, to understand what resources you're touching, and therefore, should you need to make any changes, you know which profiles and access to change before you break things. Okay, and on to the last topic. We've got about 15 minutes, so it should finish with 10 minutes for questions. But a large area which is still ongoing really within CICS 6.1 and beyond is the security documentation restructure, okay? Now, security, and I don't need to tell all of you this, it's a really complex topic within CICS especially, and ZOS. There's a lot to it. We've got new users to CICS who can look at it and be quite confused, and it can be quite a daunting thing, and I talk from experience. The interesting thing is I work with the likes of many professionals who have got decades of experience within CICS, and some of them still find certain aspects of CICS security difficult to grasp, and that's understandable. Now, our current documentation prior to 6.1 was built and kind of built off lots of legacy content, and we were building on top of it, and it meant that we had a really bloated amount of security and potentially some conflicting views as well. So the idea was we had to do something to make the concepts of CICS security easier to understand for the people who have been here a long time, but also for the people like me who have just been here a few years. So the idea is that the focus was on better assisting the junior sysprogs who are going to eventually, hopefully, become the professionals and the experts. And we've also worked with our customers again. So something I've stressed a lot within the last two presentations that I've done is that 6.1 is a very customer-driven release in the way that we spoke to our sponsored users, and we've had direct communication one-to-one with with some of our customers to understand the feedback, and we've spoke to these new to Z people to understand what they would benefit from in our documentation. And so from that, we've got feedback. We've understood that we can organize these topics into a really sensible, consumable structure. And essentially, this is what it's boiled down to. We've got on the very far left, we've got securing new doc and previous doc. I took these screenshots a fair while ago now, so I'm not sure what it looks like now. But we've got the new documentation and the old, simply because it's an ongoing project. We've also got education sections which are focused on the key areas of CICS security. So we've got a very consistent structure based on how it works. And we've also then got designing and configuring, and all of the examples follow the same format. So we've got the MRO security, for example, and then we've got examples for each sample there. So if we look to this one, we've got design examples for the MRO connection with different settings as well. So we've tried to keep it really clear and simple. And if we actually go on to these pages, we've also, again, got a consistent structure here too. So we've got examples which always are based off the preceding examples. So we've got something that is step by step. And we've also got task-based listing as well, like we had on the message IDs, so a step-by-step task list, and also examples of how to do it. But then it's all well and good knowing how to do it or being told how to do it, but then we've also got a way to say, this is what we should see, should it have worked. So that's the results area at the bottom, which allows us to measure the success of our configuration. And then something you'll see throughout the CICS 6.1 documentation is we've now got these two boxes, which is spread around the docs. We've got the recommended, which is our own advice set out by the CICS security team. But we've also got our best practice, which is validated by the health checker. So if you were in yesterday's session, we spoke about the IBM health checker and the checks we've added within CICS for 6.1. But we're trying to keep the documentation consistent with the views of the health checker, and also giving in some recommendations from the security team as well. So that's everything I've got for you today. Thank you very much for listening. I understand there's a lot of content there to go through, and as there was yesterday as well. I'm happy to take questions for the next 10 minutes if you have any. I know Jenny's been really helpful at going through as well. But alternatively, my email is always available for everyone, so you can email me and I can get back to you. But yeah, thank you very much. Is there any questions at all in chat?
I think we've had, oh, hold on. Is there some more? I'm in too many chats here.
I'm lucky to have a bunch of CICS experts in the call as well, who have been helping to answer the questions. So you've done me a favor. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, well, I think this whole thing is a really interesting topic, and I know that there are thoughts around security going forward past 6.1, but this covers where we are at the moment. And for me personally, there's a lot of stuff in here that's kind of a result of feedback that we've given to IBM on previous releases, maybe going back to one of our 5.4 upgrades and some of the encounters we had. So a bit of a plug for interacting with IBM. All this stuff that's coming out with 6.1 is kind of a result of some of those interactions. So it's a really good thing to close the circle and see that stuff coming out. So I've really enjoyed this session personally.
Thank you very much.
That's all right. So the link's up on the screen, folks. If there's no more questions, I'll close the call in a few moments. But yeah, none of these dialogues have to finish here. If anyone wants to discuss this, either offline or at further sessions at GSC, I think a lot of this is going to be a hot topic coming up. If you've got things like Extran as your main security in CICS, in the SIP palm, and maybe historically not a lot of resource security, there's an awful lot of functionality coming along at the moment that's going to be interesting to all of us as a community. So let's not finish the conversation here and carry on the debate. So thank you, Lewis.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, everybody else. And let me just check the calendar for the next one. Bear with me a moment.
Okay, well, Rob, you are checking. I just quickly respond to Jiva. So that default applies to both 6.1 and 5.6 and then before. So if you don't have the default cipher there, and so that's the true string will be used.
Okay,
thank you.
That's great.
I just got confirmation
you,
from my other backend colleagues on that. Thank you.
No, well, I should have been better prepared and know what the next session is. And we've got 4G next, which is one of our favourite presenters, Ezrael Gross, who I believe is not presenting from America and is somewhere in Europe at the moment. So we'll see him a bit later on at 10:30 UK time. So thank you very much, everyone, and see you in the next session. Cheers.